I'm Stephen Barnett.
I'm James Belknap.
And I am Ryan Zumdick, and this is our presentation on ethical theories for the movie Thank You for Smoking. I'll start out with some facts about smoking. 1 in 5 adults and teenagers smoke. Each day, more than 3,200 people under 18 smoke their first cigarette, and approximately 2,100 youth and young adults become daily smokers. 9 out of 10 smokers start smoking before the age of 18, and 98% start smoking by the age of 26. In 2001, an estimated 19% of the U.S. adults and 18% of high school students were cigarette smokers. From 1964 to 2014, the portion of adult smokers actually declined from 42% to 18%. Some more facts about smoking. More than 16 million people already have at least one disease from smoking. Lung cancer is the leading cause of cancer death among both men and women in the United States. And approximately 90% of lung cancer deaths among men and 80% among women are due to smoking. Nearly 9 out of 10 lung cancers are caused by smoking. Smoking causes many other types of cancer, including cancers of the throat, mouth, nasal cavities, esophagus, and so on. Smoking slows down lung growth in children and teens, and studies suggest that youth who smoke are more likely to develop asthma. Since 1964, more than 20 million Americans have died because of smoking, including approximately 2.5 million deaths due to exposure to secondhand smoke. Nearly 9 out of 10 COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, deaths are caused by smoking, and currently there is no cure for COPD. Men with prostate cancer who smoke are more likely to die from the disease than non-smokers. And on average, smokers die 13 to 14 years earlier than non-smokers. Now that we've kind of talked about some facts about smoking, which is the main topic that this movie revolves around, I'd like to introduce some of the main characters that are in the movie. First, the main character of the movie is Nick Naylor. He's a lobbyist and spokesperson for the Academy of Tobacco Studies, which can just pretty much be thought of as big tobacco. His job is to spin the truth and sell lies to the American people, senators, whoever it may be. And he claims he does this kind of to give him some self-gratitude just to pay the mortgage. Heather Holloway, who is a reporter for a newspaper, befriends Nick. She ends up sleeping with Nick to acquire confidential information about big tobacco so that she can later post a story or write a story that kind of unveils big tobacco's secrets. Senator Ortland Finister is the senator of Vermont and the main proponent against smoking. And his job in the movie is to persuade the American people and the Senate to put a skull and crossbones on every cigarette pack that is produced. Nick Naylor meets with a group called the Mod Squad, which stands for the Merchants of Death, and it's made up of Bobby J. and Polly Berry. These two are representatives for firearm and alcohol, and BR is Nick's boss. He is a very flamboyant person and all about cigarettes, and he's not embarrassed to say that cigarettes are cool, available, and addictive. The captain is Big Tobacco's legendary leader. It's who Nick and BR look up to, and he's the main guy for the Big Tobacco industry. Joey Naylor, who is Nick Naylor's son, plays a role in the movie. He's a 12-year-old kid, and he really looks up to Nick and wants to be good at arguing, or an arguing job like his dad is, and so he often goes on many business trips with Nick during the movie. Loren Lutch is another character in the movie. He is the original Marlboro Man. During the movie, he is dying from lung cancer, and he's sworn almost a crusade against smoking and trying to let the public know how bad smoking actually is for you. And Nick's job is to kind of persuade the Marlboro Man to stop publicly shaming the big tobacco industry and smoking. And now that I've showed you some of the main characters and facts, I'll turn it over to Steven about the plot for Thank You to Smoking.
The movie opens with Nick Naylor making a guest appearance on a daytime talk show, and he's there to talk with other guests about a bald-headed cancer boy who used to smoke. Nick is a really smooth talker, and he quickly wooed the crowd and convinced them that his industry really doesn't want people to die. They actually want them to stay alive so they can keep smoking. Nick and his ex-wife have joint custody of their 12-year-old son, Joey. And throughout the movie, Nick, he's got several opportunities to teach his son, Joey, about the benefits of being good at arguing and smoothly deceiving people. One day, Nick visits Joey's school for What Do You Do Day, and he tells the children not to blindly accept what they're being taught and to question everything, even their parents. Nick is so consumed by spinning the truth that he can't really see how pathetic he looks as he's pitching smoking to 12-year-old kids. Several times during the movie, Nick meets at a bar with his Mod Squad friends, Bobby from a pro-gun group and Polly from a pro-alcohol organization. They enjoy making light of serious issues, and they frequently discuss common problems and who has the more difficult job. In one scene, they proudly compare the number of deaths caused each year by their respective industries. And Bobby and Polly are Nick's their only true friends, and they rely on each other for encouragement. The senator from Vermont, Orland Finister, is a vocal leader in the fight against smoking, and he wants to put an ugly poison label to be printed on every pack of cigarettes. Finister is a dorky-looking man who isn't very good at defending his position, and Nick makes him look like a fool on more than one occasion. Nick and Finister only directly interact with each other a few times, but it's pretty obvious that they consider themselves to be mortal enemies. Nick comes up with an idea to counteract Finister's anti-smoking message, and he flies down south to meet the captain and discuss Nick's idea. They agree on a plan to put cigarettes in movies and use the sex appeal to boost sales. When Nick gets sent to California to meet a prominent Hollywood agent, he brings Joey along with him. And on the trip, Nick and Joey share some quality father-son time, and Nick uses that as an opportunity to teach Joey the difference between arguing and negotiating. When Joey asks Nick how he got so good at his job, Nick said that it's because he has more moral flexibility than most people, and he compares his job to an attorney defending a child murderer in court. And he says, every person deserves a fair defense. Well, so do multinational corporations. The captain sends Nick on another mission, this time to pay off the Marlboro Man, Lauren Lutch, to stop him from publicly talking about his recently diagnosed lung cancer. Lauren and Nick have somewhat of a heart-to-heart conversation, and after Nick leaves, you can tell that he kind of begins to question his own moral flexibility. Throughout the movie, Nick meets with an attractive newspaper reporter, Heather Holloway, who's writing an article about him. She's already interviewed everybody else, and now she needs Nick's point of view. There's obvious chemistry between them, and they end up sleeping together after their very first meeting. And while having sex, Nick tells Heather about anything she asks, including confidential industry information. One night while Nick and Finister are debating each other on a TV show, a call-in viewer makes a death threat against Nick. He doesn't take it very seriously, but one night after meeting with the Mod Squad, he was kidnapped, and his captors tried to kill him by covering his body with nicotine patches. Nick survived the attack, ironically because he was a smoker, and he immediately continues to promote tobacco, even from his hospital bed. Pretty soon after Nick's recovery, Heather's newspaper article is published, And in the article, Heather uses everything Nick told her, even information he thought was off the record. Heather described the Mod Squad as a group meeting that they do have to compete for the highest death toll as they compare strategies on how to dupe the American people. Her article also goes into detail about Nick's bribery of Lauren Lutch and how Nick is grooming his son Joey to live a life of deceit. Nick's boss is unsurprisingly unhappy about Heather's article and all that Nick revealed, and he tells Nick that he should have been more careful and that the article destroyed all the goodwill created by his kidnapping. Nick gets fired because his job was to keep secrets and spin the truth, and he screwed that up in a big way by telling all to Heather. After losing his job, Nick gets depressed, but he ends up having a conversation with Joey that picks him back up and motivates him to get back to work. Nick makes a public statement on TV to address the newspaper article, and in the statement he makes Heather look like a tramp, and he announces his upcoming appearance in Senator Finister's hearing about putting poison labels on cigarette packs. At the hearing, Nick does a great job defending Big Tobacco, and at the end of the hearing he realizes how much his job is negatively affecting his morals. He quits his job and says some things are more important than paying the mortgage. The movie ends by showing Nick working at his new company where he advises other executives on how to spin the truth. Nick says, "Michael Jordan plays ball, Charles Manson kills people, I talk."
Moving on from there, we're going to discuss some theories that we applied to this movie. The first one is ethical egoism. Ethical egoism is the normative ethical position that moral agents ought to do what is in their own self-interest. Ethical egoism can be broadly divided into three categories: individual, personal, and universal. An individual ethical egoist would hold that all people should do whatever benefits the individual's self-interest. A personal ethical egoist would hold that he or she should act in his or her self-interest, but would make no claims about what anyone else ought to do. A universal ethical egoist would argue that everyone should act in ways that are in their self-interest.
Existentialism is the theory that states existence precedes essence, and it is that you exist is more important. Each individual chooses what is important. Who we are is not controlled by anything other than ourselves, and our essence is determined internally by our own actions. So our values, morals, actions, and beliefs come from within, and because of that, we're free to act however we please, similar to ethical egoism. There is no higher power, greater being, or external purpose to our existence. In a few ways that relates to the movie is Nick Naylor mentioned several times that he believes individuals should be able to choose their own actions, even when that means if his son wants to start smoking on his 18th birthday. Nick's lack of regard for the risks that are directly associated with smoking indicate that he believes, at least outwardly, that defending the tobacco industry is merely a personal choice and has nothing to do with morals or ethics. The Mod Squad's conversations show that they believe that harm resulting from the use of their products isn't their responsibility at all, because consumers are ultimately responsible for their own choices. And what the Mod Squad cared about was managing their public image.
Our final theory is the ethical theory of autonomy, or respecting a person's autonomy. Autonomy is the personal rule of the self that is free from both controlling interferences by others and from personal limitations that prevent meaningful, deliberate choices. You can think of autonomy or respect for a person's autonomy as something a person has, and you can either respect it or not. An example, of autonomy, or somebody who is acting autonomously, would be a patient choosing a specific treatment plan after being presented from the doctor all relevant treatment options, and the doctor also explains all the risks associated with the treatment in terms that the patient will be able to understand. And then once the patient has all this information, they then agree to the treatment. So you're making a very clear and conscious decision with all relevant information presented. A clear example of this from the movie is of people who are not acting autonomously would be the children in Joey Naylor's class. Their teacher gives them an assignment, and they are asked the question, why is the American government the best government? This does not respect the children's autonomy because she is forming an opinion, or it's already a loaded question stating that the American government is the best government. You just need to tell me why.
Our resolution for our first theory is that ethical egoism describes Nick Naylor's actions throughout the movie perfectly. He's always looking out for his own best interests, even by encouraging other people, especially teenagers, to start smoking so he could start profiting off of them, even if it's just to pay for a flight. Towards the end of the movie, he would have stayed with Big Tobacco instead of leaving it to be a mentor for spokesmen for corporations. By staying with the Big Tobacco, he would have had more power and control because he just showed how much tobacco really needs him through his winning argument with the Senate. Also, he would have become very wealthy, and his son would also probably follow in his footsteps. Nick's ex-wife, however, would be very upset or jealous because she wouldn't gain anything from Nick's success.
The resolutions for existentialism is using the rules of thumb on page 178 of our book, How Should Nick Have Acted? The golden rule, which is do unto others as you want them to do to you. Nick encouraged consumers to continue hurting themselves by smoking, by deceiving them and leading them to disbelieve negative information about cigarettes. What he should have done is he should have encouraged consumers to make more educated decisions. Using the disclosure rule, Nick answered many of Heather Holloway's questions because they were having sex, and he thought that what they were talking about was off the record. After her article was published, it became pretty obvious to Nick that he betrayed his Mod Squad friends and that he shouldn't have given Heather any of the private information. The intuition ethic, Nick did a pretty good job throughout the movie using this rule of thumb. When faced with ethical decisions, he typically only thought of himself and his job and how he would appear in the public's eye. The categorical imperative, when the Marlboro Man was dying of lung cancer, Nick convinced him to accept money in exchange for not talking publicly about the negative consequences of smoking. Bribery is a pretty widely recognized form of corruption that Nick shouldn't engage in. The professional ethic, the problem here was that Nick's peers were just as corrupt as he was. He should have sought out a group of peers that would encourage him to think and act more ethically. The utilitarian principle, if Nick was concerned about helping the most people possible, then he would have supported Senator Finister's plan to put discouraging images on packs of cigarettes. And the virtual principle, Nick's job was to spin the truth and mislead consumers about the consequences of smoking, and he wasn't very truthful and honest about the consequences of smoking until the very end of the movie.
Our last resolution for our ethical theories is the resolution for autonomy. And in this, we see that the respect for people's autonomy is often violated in the movie Thank You for Smoking. Just some examples are Joey Naylor and his classmates answering the loaded question of why is American government the best government? Also, another example would be Nick and Heather's relationship and how it affects them both, and the American smokers and how big tobacco affects their autonomy. So I think what question we can explore is if these agents were acting autonomously in these situations, how would they be different or better for themselves? And so if we were to look at Joey Naylor's case, we could see that if the teacher was to ask them the question like, which government is the best government, or why do you believe the American government is a good government? They could have also been acting more autonomously like that. Nick and Heather's relationship also, they probably both were not making the best decisions in their interest. Nick was probably a little clouded with his judgment just from Heather almost seducing him in a way. So they both, and then also Heather was probably a little clouded by her judgment of trying to deceive Nick. And so they both could have acted better and their situations could have improved. The American smokers, I also feel, have their autonomy disrespected by big tobacco and the truths they spin, both with Nick and the Academy of Tobacco Studies. They almost put out false reports of the health risks of smoking. So if these agents were to be acting more autonomously, I believe the situations that the characters find themselves in could have been either avoided or turned out better for them.
Our costs for the ethical egoism would be legal fees, bribes, advertisements, paying actors to smoke in movies, expensive cars, mansions, private jets, and other expensive tastes. The legalities in ethical egoism would be fines and imprisonment for misinformation, fines and imprisonment for bribery with the incident with the Lauren Litch Marlboro Man, and fines for leaking confidential information with the incident with Heather Holloway. The impact from ethical egoists would be wealth, power, and possible alienation from family and friends due to incredible wealth and power, possible corruption, and a higher risk of being abducted and murdered with nicotine patches from vigilantes.
The cost, legalities, and impact for existentialism. The costs, keeping track of lies and deceit is often more expensive than telling the truth, because you always got to keep track of what you said so that you keep your story straight. Nick was so good at spinning the truth that he was called the Sultan of Spin. Being known as a deceitful dude made it more difficult for Nick to have true friends, and he even admitted at one point that Bobby and Polly were his only real friends. The legalities, if Nick ever got caught bribing a government official, the legal consequences would be severe, possibly even career-ending. And the impact, Nick's life was filled with stress because he acted as if his interests were most important. And Nick was very close-minded towards other points of view, which prevented his ethical beliefs from improving.
Now I'd like to explore the costs of autonomy, and the two ways I'll do this are the cost of being autonomous and then also when you are not acting autonomously. And so firstly, the cost for being autonomous. When you are making autonomous decisions or your autonomy is being respected, you are able to make deliberate and meaningful, clear choices. One example of this is Nick making the best decision for himself when he does not come back to work for Big Tobacco after his speech at the Senate. You could think of it in a way that he is able to be more autonomous and make more deliberate, meaningful decisions because he is not feeling the pressure after being let go from Big Tobacco, not feeling the pressure of they want him to, spin the story this way or that way, and they need him to do this certain thing or another another thing, and so he's able to think more clearly and make a better autonomous decision for himself. Also, another cost of acting autonomously would be making decisions free from intervention. This is shown when Nick Naylor's career day speech. He advises the children in Joey's class to question authority and not take everything that they say as ultimate or truthful. I believe he says a line, if they tell you one thing, you say, well, says who? So he's letting these kids think for themselves and encouraging them to think for themselves. So to explore the costs of not being autonomous, we can look at decisions made that are not in a person's best interests. And one example of this from the movie is Nick and Heather's relationship. And had Nick been acting autonomous, would he have given the confidential information to Heather? I don't believe so. He was probably had some clouded judgment, or Heather was able to disrespect his autonomy in a way that she was able to get what she wanted. Another cost of not being autonomous would be making decisions that are influenced to not be your own. And like I pointed out before, a classic example of this would be Joey Naylor and his classmates when they're influenced to think a certain way about the American government with the loaded question the teacher presents. Now I'm going to explore some of the legalities of acting autonomously or not acting autonomously. Ortland Finister, he wants to have the skull and crossbones put onto the cigarette packs. So we can think about this in a way of how this action would affect the American people or smokers' autonomy. Ortland could argue that he is fighting for the autonomy of the American people because he wants them to be fully informed by knowing that by putting the skull and crossbones on the cigarette pack that they are making this decision that will most likely affect their health negatively. So he is presenting more information or giving full information, thus making the American people or smokers more autonomous. But Nick could also argue that he is fighting for the American people's autonomy because he believes that they are already informed about their decisions about smoking and already know the full information and have already been making autonomous decisions from the reports that the Academy of Tobacco Studies posts and other facts and findings that outside agencies have been publishing about smoking. But to kind of answer, who was right and who was actually making the American people more autonomous, they somewhat answered at the end of the movie. The American government ends up taking legal action against Big Tobacco and the Academy of Tobacco Studies. They force Big Tobacco to settle with American smokers who have had health problems and make them pay fines. I believe it was somewhere upwards of the $25 billion mark. And then also because of this, the Academy of Tobacco Studies disbands. So we can kind of see that putting the skull and crossbones on the cigarette packs would make the American people more autonomous, give them more full information about the decision they are going to make by smoking. Finally, the last impact for our ethical theories is the impacts of respect for autonomy and the impacts of violation of respect for autonomy. We can explore the respect of autonomy first. When you do respect somebody's autonomy, it impacts them in a way that they are able to make decisions that are truly their own. And from these decisions that are made, the people believe that they are in their best interest because they do have their autonomy respected while making these decisions. And thus the consequences from these decisions are solely the person's because they freely made the decision to act that way while being autonomous. However, the impacts of violation of respect for autonomy are a little greater. people's decisions are influenced usually by some outside source, whether it was how we examined Joey's classmates or Nick and Heather. And then these decisions that are made from influences are not always in the person's best interests or are flawed in some way, which can bring about problems, as we see Heather publishing the newspaper article about Nick and Big Tobacco. It didn't turn out very well for Nick and the people involved. And so that's it for our costs, legalities, and impacts of our ethical theories. And now we would like to make a final recommendation about what we believe the characters in Thank You for Smoking ought to have done, or how they ought to have acted. And what we believe is the outcome in these situations the characters were involved in would have been more beneficial for them and everybody involved had these actions been more in line with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism, just a quick way to think about it, is it's an ethical theory that places focus on the good for all over the good of individuals. A clear example of this is the skull and crossbones example from the movie. They believed that putting the skull and crossbones on the cigarette packs would be more beneficial for the American people than it would be bad for the big tobacco industry. So that's one way we can explore Nick's actions and how they might have been different had he followed this view. He would have encouraged the skull and crossbones, and thus maybe the big tobacco industry wouldn't have seen the fines, and the Academy of Tobacco Studies wouldn't have been shut down. And finally, our discussion questions. They'll be posted to the discussion board, but we kind of wanted to review them to get the topics rolling and get them in your head. Our first question is, Nick Naylor is, or leading up to the question is, Nick Naylor is often preemptively judged because of his job title as Big Tobacco spokesman, as you can see when he is kidnapped by the vigilantes. Do you believe that a person's moral and ethical traits are reflective of the company or industry that's in which they work for? So you could think of it as, are Nick Naylor's ethics and morals those that are Big Tobacco's ethics and morals, or can they be separate? And also for our second question, a kind of lead-up explanation to it is, Nick Naylor's job as spokesman for Big Tobacco has an effect on tobacco consumers, but his actions and attitudes also affect their family, co-workers, and business associates. In the movie, Nick says that he is only trying to pay the mortgage, but it's important to consider how your job affects other people's lives, and if you believe so or if you believe not, explain why. And hopefully we can have a good discussion about these questions that we think are pretty prominent in the movie Thank You for Smoking. And these are just a list of our outside resources that we use to acquire some of this information. And we'd like to thank you for your time, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Have fun on the discussion board.